for the majority. Because can you imagine what horrible the situation would be for you if you would have to accept that I failed because I am an idiot or whatever. But if I say, okay, basically it's not my fault, it's market forces are impenetrable, crazy, it makes it much easier to swallow it. So that's, I think, nonetheless a nice dialectical observation, how the very injustice, capitalism is accepted by people not because it's just. No, those who are more intelligent, blah, 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 succeed. If it were to be just, it would explode long ago. What makes it palpable is its very injustice, and that we know that it's unjust. In this sense, we can, as it were, accept our own failure as something which is not our own responsibility. So much about this. Now, let me return to belief. What is the basic, what's then the structure of belief? If it's never clear what we believe, how it functions, and so on and so on. Now we come to the chicken. It's an old story, you know it, I will just give a new twist to it. You know this old classical joke about a man who believes himself to be a grain of corn, seed, whatever. He is taken to the mental institution where doctors do their best to finally convince him that he is not a grain but a man. However, when he is cured, convinced that he is not a grain but a man, and allowed to leave the hospital, he immediately comes back trembling, scared. There is a chicken outside the door and he is afraid that the chicken will eat him. The doctor says, of course, dear fellow, you know very well that you are not a grain but a man. Of course I know that, replies the patient, but does the chicken know that? Now you will say that's a joke. No, I will try to prove it now in the second part of that this is exactly how it works. For example, this is what psychoanalysis is about. It's easy to convince you that your symptoms are just effects of your repressed traumas and so on and so on. But the problem is to convince the unconscious, which is, as it were, the chicken in you. How does this work even with Marxism? I think that this is what Marx was, which is why I think Marx should still be read. This is what Marx was targeting. Precisely, I claim this paradox of belief is what Marx was targeting in his good old-fashioned, but I think we should return to it, theory of so-called commodity fetishism. Let me quote you the first sentence, or the first two sentences of this subdivision 4 of the chapter 1 of Capital, the fetishism of the commodity and its secret. Quote, a commodity appears at first sight an extremely obvious, trivial thing, but its analysis brings out that it is a very strange thing, abounding in metaphysical subtleties and theological niceties. Everybody reads this passage, but are you aware how strange it is? What Marx does here is exactly the opposite of what one would expect from, precisely a Marxist social critic. The idea is you take a mystified ideological edifice, religious, fantasy, whatever, and you try to reduce it to real-life phenomena, economic, political processes. You try to show how even these most mystical, sublime phenomena are generated by the real-life struggles, production, and so on. That's the usual idea of critique of ideology, no? To show how ideological phenomena are generated by real life. But Marx is saying here almost the opposite, that the problem is not to reduce sublime phenomena to ordinary reality. The problem is to become aware of the, as it were, metaphysical subtleties and theological niceties, of the theological dimension of what appears to us as ordinary reality itself. This is for Marx commodity fetishism. Commodity fetishism is not you think you are dealing with something mystical, commodity, whatever, but in reality, as we put it, commodity is just an ordinary object, part of social exchange, and so on and so on. You think you are dealing with an ordinary object, but in reality, no, that's the whole problem. In what kind of reality there is this theological aspect of commodity. So That's my formula. When, let us say, a critical Marxist encounters a bourgeois subject immersed in commodity fetishism, the Marxist reproach to the bourgeois subject is not a commodity may seem to you to be a magical object endowed with special powers, but it really is just a reified expression of relations between people. The actual Marxist reproach is rather, you may think that the commodity appears to you as a simple embodiment of social relations, that, for example, money is just a kind of voucher entitling you to a part of social product. But this is not how things really seem to you. In your social reality, by means of your participation in social exchange, you bear witness to the uncanny fact that a commodity appears to you as a magical object endowed with social powers. In other words, to go back, just to explain this, to make it absolutely clear. So we have three levels, not two. We don't simply have, this is my central point, we don't simply have reality and illusion, illusory beliefs. It's not that in reality a commodity is a social product, some object becomes a commodity because of its role in social exchange, but we idiots are victims of commodity fetishism and think this is an inherent value, there is something magic in a commodity or money. No, the paradox is much nicer in Marx. Commodity is in reality just an ordinary object who functions as money, commodity, because of social relations. And this is what we think also. So what we think is close to reality, if you want. But the side of commodity fetishism is not our beliefs, it's our social reality itself. We act as if we embody our belief in our social exchange. It's a little bit the same as, let us say your father is an idiot. Or no, this is too obvious example. Let us take anti-Semitism, our late capitalist liberal anti-Semitism. Jews are people like others. And we think they are. But nonetheless, when you encounter a Jew, most of us, but not only a Jew, you can replace Jews with all other races and so on and so on, whenever there is a racism, you treat them in your social exchange itself, your anti-Semitic or other racist prejudices are embodied. So you got the point. When Marx defines ideology as Sie wissen das nicht, aber sie tun es. They don't know it, but still they are doing it. It doesn't mean the stupidity of they don't know what they are doing. They are doing one thing, but they think they misperceive what they are doing. It's that the illusion is not in what people think, but in what they do. It's they don't see the illusion that they follow in what they are doing. Let us say that you are of another race. I, as a white liberal, which I know, but let us say, oh, I like blacks, blah, blah, blah. But then, through some hints, you get my racism. Literally, you see, I don't know, I am not aware of beliefs which I practice in my acts. That's the side of ideological illusion of Marx. You got my point here, how contemporary cynicism uses this gap. Of course, at the level of explicit belief, of our explicit conviction, we can be open, blah, blah, blah. And at that level, maybe we live in a post-ideological era. What interests me is ideology, which is embodied in material life itself, in social exchanges, and so on and so on. So let me go on. So we can imagine a Marxist commodity fetishism version of the story about chicken. A bourgeois subject is visiting a course of Marxism where he is taught about commodity fetishism. However, after the finished course, he comes back to his teacher complaining that he is still the victim of commodity fetishism. The teacher tells him, but you know now how things stand, that commodities are only expressions of social relations, there is nothing magic about them. And then, of course, the pupil replies, of course, I know that. But the commodities I'm dealing with do not know it. That's commodity fetishism. Now you will say I'm dreaming. Maybe, but Marx is dreaming with me. Here is a famous quote from Capital, when Marx says the same thing, where he invokes this wonderful metaphor of commodities themselves talking to each other. A quote, If commodities could speak, they would say this: our use value may interest man, but it does not belong to us as objects. What does belong to us as objects, however, is our value, our own intercourse as commodities proves it, and so on and so on. So again, the true task is not to convince people that commodities are just ordinary objects and so on, but as it were, to convince the commodities. That is to say, to get rid of ideology which is embodied in our real social interaction. Not to change the way we speak about commodities, but